welcome. It's a night. It's a fucking time, man. It's a night and it's a time. I ask myself, where am I heading? I then wrote, we are like rivers that flow with the wind as well as the sediment. For me, it has been a time of unraveling in all of the instruments and tools that I've discovered. Sifting through the artifacts of our history, piecing it or stitching it together has been a really fun time, as well as writing and painting and drawing my way through it as well. Um, it seems to me that my predicament that I was born into is no different than any of yours. However, it matters how we are shaped by the environment that we are born into, by the storytellers and the dictators of our lives. It really does matter who is telling us these stories and what stories are being told to us. One of my first bits of interest was music and sort of sound, like things that sounded differently, things that didn't necessarily match my internal dialogue, but also things that were very hard to digest. It seems to me that sound alone cannot carry the fabric of life that was needed or that was lived in order to produce some of the sounds that are emitted from all acts of human expression. A sound can help you transform the perspective of their expression, but it's almost like a window into a perception of time that is very distinctive to its storytellers. There are certain sounds of music or certain sounds of maybe sounds aren't necessarily what I'm exactly talking about. Sounds are a part of it, but like sort of currents of energy and intention. You can almost like sniff it out, the difference between people's intention. People who have sort of regurgitated the material into a sort of hyperfixation of mimicking behavior, maybe, and the people who have sort of like who have created something from nothing. What I noticed with a lot of movements nowadays, art or just expressions of humanity, is that it seems to be like a bunch of mimicking rather than learning from one another. And I guess that's like something I'm willing to be convinced of otherwise is music, or not music, but like is copy learning from something online and replicating it or mimicking it and then sort of formalizing it into a system or an algorithm that will inevitably sort of pick up the current of energy that it's projecting and bring attention to it. My problem is with this sort of notion of this sort of happening that's surrounding us in our access points of expression is that novelty almost ceases to exist because the current access points are strictly formatted towards familiarity. How do I why can't I say that? I'm looking it up. Familiarity. Why can't I say that word? Familiar familiarity. Okay, it just didn't sound right in my head. Familiarity. Okay. Um, but it pushes this sort of notion towards what we are, what has already happened, what's familiar, and I can't. I mean, sure. I mean, I have my own spaces of time that I use for contentment because it's familiar. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's like something that's like grotesque and it's happening, but it's more or less grotesque or disgusting when I guess when it becomes more idolized in people's lives and they can't like sort of get past this idolization and it sort of floods or seeps into the expression of its of whatever you notice this happening and we're a weird transition of you could say narrative myth of culture. There's belief systems that are dying out and certain ways that are going to have to sort of not cease to exist but sort of people are going to have to adapt. That's something I'm having to deal with in my life is adapting to the circumstances and adapting to my under own standing to adapting to my own understanding and that can take time because we're in a society where not even a society it's more or less a system that has sort of been infiltrated or that's infiltrated society and society is sort of it's been It's been dumbed down, simplified. It's being cut off. What makes society society has pretty much been cut off. Like true human interaction, novel human interaction has been cut off. Everything is sort of catered towards an algorithm. You meet people through sort of algorithmic systems, or you meet people by um, by the predetermined connection points or access points. You have to remember, I'm not saying these are bad and I want to eliminate them because that just doesn't make sense. First of all, I mean, these places are they have their points, their usefulness. But I can't help but notice that these are very self-destructive in its access because it sort of fools people into believing that their worth is based upon it's hard to even phrase this. One of the sayings I have to immediately go back to that I've been working on or I've been thinking about is a world made for everyone is a world made for no one. And these sorts of ideologies are existing around us is where they believe that everyone is worthy. And there's so many different definitions of what everyone means. Because based upon moral structures, you're not going to allow the rapist or the murderer or the serial killer to get along this everyone train, right? But I recently read in the book The Doors of Perception, I heard or I read the sort of quote or phrase, whatever you want to call it, species of mind. And I can't help but think that. And this is where like you get into the topics of like eugenics and like shit like this, which is a whole other can of worms, which I'm not necessarily getting into the specifics of my own personal, not beliefs, but interest in what I like to study, right? I'm not getting to these points of where I'm like implementing ideas, but when you consider that there's a species of mind, I can't help but being brought towards like the mind and perception and how it can be dictated to sort of like inject happenings. What I mean by a happening is like a cultural sort of event or a localized event. One of the ways I like to measure um, happenings, or you can kind of, how do I say this? One of the ways I like to provide an example of measuring happenings is like at first there was serial killers. In their own way, they're in their own shapes, they were serial killing, right? Dahmer, BTK, Ted Bundy. However, there's a progression that you have to follow to sort of see the societal evolution as well as the biological evolution that is adapting to the circumstance or environment. So now serial killing is now brought to you the next wave, which is mass shootings. And the way I like to provide evidence into like why this leads to that is serial killers were kind of dominant in a time where nothing was being watched. There wasn't as many cameras, surveillance, there was no phones and the cameras in everyone's pockets, and I couldn't just like go live randomly at times back in the 70s or whatever. Now I have the ability to launch my own TV show, right? So when you're born into a society where you are constantly observed, the only like practical thinking, if you are this sort of person who likes to kill, right, is to get as many in one go. And I mean, you're seeing it throughout the 2000s. You're seeing it, and it's a shitty thing. It's a shitty fucking thing. I think it. I think there's many different ways you could explain or provide sort of directions of why these things happen. But I think if you look farther ahead of where these sort of mass shootings are leading us, I think it can kind of go one or two ways. And I think we're kind of seeing both ways happen. Not in its an extreme form yet, but uh, suicide is a very is probably the topic of most people's minds when you bring when you bring up the sort of mood of the collective of society. And I think some people are very angry and they want to kill people. So they go kill a bunch of people. But a lot of people almost see the usefulness of ending their own lives as a way to cause other people's frustration and pain and suffering. And I think why it's such a I think why I think mass suicides will begin to happen in a way is simply because when you're being observed or being watched, you're constantly being measured in some sort of way. And in most structures of mind, suicide is this great happening because I think we all face these sort of thoughts. What are we doing? Why the fuck are we doing it? I want to die. And I think we envy it in a way. And just for those 20 seconds that's the death of the suicide really takes place of everyone's mind, it becomes such a potent thing, and you really start to care, and that it starts to mean something. Hmm. Carry on.